Hello and welcome to Talk Spooky to Me, the Ghost Story Guys mail show. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Vestal.
And this is our opportunity to hear from you, our listeners. Paul, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks. Been watching lots of gruesome programs recently in anticipation of the fact that next Wednesday I'll just be watching every episode of Unsolved Mysteries, so I'm just trying to cram in as much as I can.
That is fair. I got to say that one LA Homicide one you were telling me about sounds very much my jam. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the first season's good as well. It's like 5 episodes, they're all about an hour. Really good.
I decided to spend my day off road tripping around southwestern Ontario, and I actually had a fun little adventure, most of which I'm going to save for our Patreon live show later today. But I did have a great little moment that I wanted to share with the listeners. So at one point I stopped into a gas station to buy a couple things, and when I walked in the door, immediately I was met with this very pleasant, sort of rich smell. And you know how sometimes you'll smell something and it'll take you right back to a particular memory, and you'll experience it in a way that you just didn't think you could anymore?
Yeah.
So that happened. I walked into this gas station, I walked up the stairs, and all of a sudden I was right back in my aunt and uncle's house. Now, where we live in Revelstoke, where we lived as kids, we lived right next door to an aunt and uncle on my dad's side. They had a nice sized house, and they had a big garden. My aunt was a wonderful gardener. She always had incredible produce every year, and she would give us lots of zucchini and raspberries. It was a really wonderful thing. And when we were younger, we would hang out there, and they would kind of look after us from time to time. And that's kind of, I think, how I ended up being partially so goddamn weird, because I was this tiny child hanging out around with these adults who were just having coffee. So I developed this deep love for shooting the shit and having coffee. Well, when I walked into this gas station, that was the smell. It just hit me immediately, and I was right back there. I was 4, 5, 6 years old. And so I said to the guy behind the counter, I said, "Is that incense you're burning?" And I think, again, because I forget to put on my smile face sometimes, I think he thought I was going to say something unpleasant about this. So we recoiled a little bit. And I said, no. I said, I explained the situation. And he goes, oh, yeah, no. He said, it is incense. So he brings up my purchases. I pay for them, and he disappears into the back for a second. And then he comes back as my receipt's printing, and he hands me a box. It's a box for the incense. And I said, oh, okay. I said, do you mind if I take a picture? And he said, no, you just take it. And I didn't know what to say. It was such a kind gesture. And I told him, I said, well, geez, man, I don't know what to say. He goes, look, you don't have to say anything. He said, the fact that essentially what he said is like, you told me that I managed to connect you to this memory with this. He's like, you need this more than I do. So you please take it. And it was just such an unexpected, kind thing for someone to do.
Oh, I like things like that.
Yeah. Not all my stories have to involve unpleasantness, shootings, or weird sex stuff. Although patrons in the live show will get to hear about some weird sex stuff I heard. So, hey, it still happens. It's just sometimes there's nice stuff too.
Yeah, good.
But I as I mentioned to you off air, I ended up staying in a little motel in a town on Lake Erie for a couple days, because it's the last place I think left in Canada where you can stay next to the beach for less than $90 a night.
Mm.
And I had dinner 2 nights running at a mini golf place, which I don't recommend you do at the age of 41. Woof.
Was it hip and happening? Hectic?
It was none of those things. It was so slow that I actually ended up having a very long conversation with the old guy who runs the mini golf place, because he'd recognized me walking past a few times. So he came out to have a conversation because there was just so little going on.
Right.
So yeah, the opposite of hip and happening.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that for him and his business.
You and me both. It was, I don't know. It was very much a throwback to places I remember seeing as a kid. Again, mini golf out the back, burgers and hot dogs up front. Yeah, I got to go back in time for a little bit. Unfortunately, my digestive system is still that of an older man, and so I'm suffering. I'm suffering.
You can do it. Faith in you.
Well, I tell you what got me through is my enthusiasm for getting to this episode, because not only do we have a couple pieces of listener mail, but we have a conversation with John Olsen coming up. John Olsen, of course, author of the Stranger Bridgerland series, a really interesting look at paranormal stories from all around the world. But on this episode, we're going to be talking about the stories in his latest volume, Stranger Utah. So I'm really looking forward to getting to that. But of course, before we do that, we got to answer at least a little bit of mail.
Our courteous and efficient staff is on call 24 hours a day to serve all your supernatural elimination needs. We're ready to believe you.
Are you going to pronounce the name of the first place?
Oh, no, that's all you, my friend. That's all you.
It looks, I don't know how you dare with the name some towns and cities in Canada. Are you not managing that?
Outibridge.
Outibridge.
Okay, wasn't that far off.
Yeah. Well, it depends. Some people call it Outibridge. Some people call it Outibridge. I call it the wrong side of Sheffield, but that's just me. So our first message is from the marvellously named Flowy Two Hats. Hi, Flowy Two Hats. And Flowy Two Hats says, does Paul live anywhere near Outibridge? I'm not a stalker yet. My brother lives there, next to such Fortean place names as Boggart Lane. It's such a magical place. I had a spooky encounter at the top of Jawbone Hill that saved my life. Now there's a cliffhanger if I ever heard one, Brennan.
I'll say, Flowy, you got to tell us. Come on.
Absolutely. Yes, Jawbone Hill. What a strange name it is.
Are you familiar with Jawbone Hill?
I am. I've walked along Jawbone Hill last summer, actually. I walked back from that part of Sheffield, me and Theo, when I was doing a step challenge through work.
Oh, very cool.
21,000 steps from there to my house.
That is a lot of freaking steps.
Yeah, it's only 2 hours. But yes, so Jawbone Hill is one of those mysterious places. It's also known as Whale Jaw Hill to the locals there. Even though it's one of those, it's got this story that, it's called that because there used to be the jaw of a whale on the hill. What? Whereas if you look at it from the air, it looks like a jaw.
Oh, okay.
So most people think that the road's called that because of it. But that area was known from a boundary stone that was erected in 1183 by the Earl of Hallamshire, Richard de Lovetot. What a name.
Very saucy.
Yes. So, it's obviously Boggart Lane. There's a Boggart Lane that leads to the Boggart Spring and well up there as well. So, yeah, it's a strange place. A friend of mine who I used to work with who sadly passed away 4 years ago, we had his funeral up there. And it was a pretty crappy day. But as we were driving up there, we just got in the middle of a blizzard.
Oh.
And so we all chuckled at that because that was the kind of sense of humour he had, that he'd like to see us all fucking stranded at his funeral. in Outibridge. That would have been great fun for everyone. So, it is a strange, it's the kind of place, it's almost, because that didn't used to be part of Sheffield till 1974, that end. It was just kind of left to its own devices. So it's a strange, and it's on the cusp of the. It runs around to the peaks from that side, so you don't have to go far to be far away from the civilization and sights and smells and sounds of Sheffield itself.
We wouldn't want to be too far away from that.
Especially not next weekend. It's my local beer festival next weekend. Ha-ha!
I saw you post something about that. I'm very jealous.
I know. Beer festival. It's 7 minutes walk away. What's the world coming to?
I thought you were going to say, what's the worst that could happen? I was like, don't say that.
Well, I don't know. We haven't decided what time we're going out on Saturday yet. We're not sure if it's going to be 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock. We're going to see what the lads think.
I mean, 12 o'clock seems appropriate. You wouldn't want to waste that extra hour.
Well, you've got to ease yourself in, Got to carb up. 12 pubs in a mile and a half. Woohoo!
Tune into our next podcast, Beer Festival Tips with Paul. The Beer Festival guys. Actually, I bet that would sell.
I love hops. Do you like hops?
Oh, well, man, if I ever say that on a podcast, I'm giving it all up and going back to working in a grocery store.
There's a good plummy grapefruit to this pale ale. It encapsulates the developing taste bud of the real ale connoisseur.
Folks, I know he's kidding, and I still want to hit him.
Do you not like pretentious beer man?
I guess it's better than pretentious cryptocurrency man or pretentious AI man. I was actually at a gathering a little while ago, and some dude comes over and says, "How do you use AI in your business?" Oh, fuck. It's going to be one of those conversations. Okay. Our next email comes from Marlene. Marlene says, "Hello, gentlemen. Former resident of Utah here. I call it living behind the Zion curtain." That's pretty good.
Hey.
You'd asked in this week's episode on Beehive State creepiness why Cornishmen might have wound up in mining there. Although gold, silver, and of course copper had been found in Utah, Brigham Young originally forbade Mormon involvement in prospecting and mining, being focused on building a strong farming community. He eased up a bit on that after the railway came through. Thus, mine owners began bringing in workers from other areas and religions, which is why there are sizable Irish Catholic and Greek Orthodox communities in SLC. The Greek festival there is a fun one. When I was interning at the Utah Museum of Natural History, I did a research project on Park City and learned it was primarily Catholic and Methodist community, where Mormons were not welcome at all. I found one old Park City newspaper article that reported a group of Mormons had been discovered, meeting secretly in a Chinese laundry and were out of town. Hope that's mildly interesting to you. Big fan of the podcast, Marlene, now living in the People's Republic of Portland. Well, thank you, Marlene. Funny enough, I'm just listening to a Cool Zone Media podcast on the riots that happened in Portland in 2020. And I'm learning a lot about the place. Not all of it good, but still, it is a beautiful city. In fact, as the poet Constantine Cavafy once said of Alexandria, whatever war damage it suffered, however much smaller it's become, it's still a wonderful city. I didn't know that. Again, I wish I'd done more of a historical dive into the histories of Utah prior to that episode. I did a lot of paranormal looking, but I blanked on the history. Good old Bren's brain. It's 100 degrees or 100 miles in one direction, never the other.
I think they're one of them states where you kind of think, oh, well, I don't really want to dive into that history, because you kind of presume you know what it's going to be about, and often it isn't.
Yeah, and I mean, it being the sort of the center of the Mormon church, it has a really contentious history. The church has worked a great deal to whitewash a lot of its activity back in the sort of the 19th century. But
I'm glad we've never done that.
No, us Canadians never. Nope. British, nope, we're all good.
No, we just went around the world educating everyone.
That's it, and we have been chill and cool with everyone here forever.
Yep. We gave everybody railways.
That's it, and we didn't build them on the backs of poor people who had no other option.
No, not at all.
Good times.
The best of times.
We like to call it we imperialism.
There's no I in British imperialism. It's we.
That's right. Oh, man.
One world under British rule.
Well, all right. Now that we've committed, I think, a hate crime, on to the next email.
Yorkshire puddings for all.
Okay, I'm on board with that.
Tam writes, since discovering your podcast after one episode, I was hooked. Now I await a new episode like an American awaiting an Amazon package. Is it their Amazon package, or is it their neighbours they're going to steal? That's the question, Tam. Hello from Tasmania. Hooray! I just wanted to say, when Paul laughs, he reminds me of a precious pup. I have the same laugh. I love your podcast. I'm awaiting my tax return so I can join, and I have my eye on the Blue Ghost Story Guys t-shirt. Never change, beautiful. Tam.
Oh, that is high praise, Paul. A precious puppy indeed.
I'll take any compliment that comes from Tasmania, the home of the thylacine.
Footage to be released shortly, we swear.
You don't need to convince me. We know that. What can you say? This week, we've discovered that Komodo dragons' teeth are coated in iron.
I'm sorry, what?
Komodo dragons, their teeth, they're coated in iron.
Really?
They've essentially got metal teeth. Because, they need an extra weapon.
Well, I was going to say, they seem like real pricks anyways. This just seems like an unfair advantage.
They're venomous, man-eating bastards.
I just feel like God is kind of getting tired of our shit, and so he's just starting to arm the animal world with ever more ridiculous weaponry. So, he's given the orcas a craven lust for the blood of yachts. And now apparently the Komodo dragon with its Moonraker-esque iron teeth.
It's the future.
The day the pandas turn up with an AR-15, man, we are in trouble.
There's a bigger lizard out that area that can climb trees as well.
A bigger lizard than the Komodo dragon?
I think so, yeah. There's a big one that's been spotted in, I'm not sure if it's Papua New Guinea or one of the islands near there. It's on my upcoming 300th episode with Richard Freeman, where we talk about man-eating creatures of all descriptions, and we touch on Komodo dragons.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad that I've got some nightmare fuel on M&M to look forward to.
Absolutely. Oh, there's no shortage of man-eaters on there.
Please tell me there's a purple people eater.
Did you have the game?
The game?
There was a purple people eater game, which was like a plastic monster that ate people. It's a very distant memory from my childhood because we couldn't afford it. Yeah, Art Bell used to play it a lot on Ghost to Ghost.
Really?
Purple people eater song, yeah.
Oh, the song. Okay, I thought he was going to play the game. I just imagined him like playing Hungry Hippos on the air while just total silence. Yeah, right. Almost got him, folks.
Yeah, I rebought that the other year.
Hungry Hippos?
Yeah.
Does it still kick ass?
Yeah, it's great fun. I think it's great, things like that. You're thinking outside the box, and loads of people do it. Most people usually pull them out Christmas, New Year, or wherever when you've got the family round and everybody has a laugh. And sometimes you can play a game that takes you, like you were saying about the aroma of coffee, takes you back to a certain place and time. You know, playing Buckaroo, that will always remind me of being 7, doesn't matter how old I am. I just wish I'd kept my Jaws game.
It was like a Jaws board game?
Yeah, so do you know what Buckaroo is, first of all?
I do not.
Right, so Buckaroo is a plastic donkey, and it's got a saddle on it. And the idea of the game is it's triggered, but you don't know when it's triggered. So you all have a variety of plastic things that you have to put on the donkey's saddle before it bucks and throws everything up in the air, but you don't know. So it's like there's no time limit. You don't know. It could go off in 10 seconds. It could go off in a minute. So you keep going until you're the last person to put something on, and it throws everything off. And that's Buckaroo. And essentially Jaws was the Jaws version of that, where you got a giant shark's mouth full of things, like hands and tin cans and stuff. And you had a hook, and you had to try and hook them out of Jaws's mouth before it went "Grr," and ate you.
You know, Paul, I'm starting to understand where our generation gets their anxiety disorders.
What with that and Mousetrap?
Yeah. There's a whole lot of cortisol flowing through the veins of our childhood is what I'm taking from this.
Absolutely, because especially when you've got a game like Operation, because you've got to lick it, haven't you? See how electric it is.
Nope. Never once occurred to me in all of my years. So
it's a bit tingly.
There we go. See? Ghost Story guys. Saving you the trouble of licking. Nope, not going to say that. Anyways. We're going to have to draw a line there under email. Because we have our conversation with John Olsen of Stranger Bridgerland coming up. And it's a good thing we pre-recorded it, Paul, because I would not want to be going in there. We would not be able to stop laughing. And
yeah, we're talking about licking.
Oh, we have another guest hung up on us. Well, I guess it's going to happen. Oh, boy.
Not again.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And then we'll be back with John Olsen of Stranger Bridgerland. Welcome back. As promised before the break, we have a guest on this episode, someone I'm very much looking forward to talking to, especially after our most recent episode, Keep Utah Weird. He is the author of the Stranger Bridgerland series, which has just released its 8th volume, of course, that is Stories of Utah. He is John Olsen. John, welcome to the Ghost Story, guys.
Thanks so much for having me on. This is quite a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Paul and I have been looking forward to this. I mean, of course, Paul's had the pleasure already. You've been on his show, is it twice now, I believe?
Yes.
And hopefully he'll want to come back again.
Yes. And anybody who'll put up with me more than once is like, that's great.
That's my line, John. That's what I've been saying for the 4 years I've been working with Paul. So, John, before we dive into the new book, Stranger Utah, I wondered if we could just go back a little bit for our listeners who don't know and talk about the origin of the Stranger Bridgerland series, including the name, because it's a very evocative name.
Yeah. Bridgerland is basically kind of an undefined part of northern Utah, part of Wyoming, and part of Idaho. And it's called Bridgerland because it was originally mapped out by Jim Bridger, who was an explorer and a trapper up here. And he kind of mapped it out for those that were coming in to settle. And so it's kind of an unofficial name, Bridgerland, but I used it because my very first book was all mostly close to me, because when I first started collecting stories 30 something years ago, it was all, I had to hunt them down, word of mouth kind of thing. So it was, so the first one I named Stranger Bridgerland. And then as I kept getting more stories and it kind of widened out, of course, all over, I kept the series as Stranger Bridgerland, and then I've just added the books. I have Stranger World, Stranger Paranormal, Stranger West, Stranger US, but it all falls under that Stranger Bridgerland book series. So
what I really like about the name too is it gives this sort of sense of a similar sense to what Mike Dash did in the book Borderlands. It sort of establishes Bridgerland as this place where anything is possible.
Yeah, it really does.
Even though it refers to one particular geographical place. In my head, when I think about Stranger Bridgerland, it's this sort of liminal place between one world and another.
Yeah, it does. And, one thing, I've actually never admitted this on any other podcast, but the stranger part, it falls really well with the paranormal. But at the time, I was like a huge fan of Stranger Things. And so I liked the way that sounded, the show. I don't know if you've seen that or not. So I took the stranger part, from there, even though it falls with paranormal and everything. But yeah, so I took, a Stranger Bridgerland, it just felt like it flowed really well and geographically. And yeah. And like you say, I kind of felt like it gave the perspective of, the strange and the unusual. So
very much so. And as someone, obviously your first book was focused on northern Utah, and where you, I believe you spent most of your life, correct?
Yeah, I've lived my whole life in northern Utah, so I've done a lot of traveling, but this is where I've always called home.
It's a beautiful place to call home.
Yeah, it is. I love it here. I really love it, and yeah, it's got such an amazing paranormal background along with Utah, and a lot of different places are like that, but this is because I call it home. It's kind of my paranormal place.
Growing up there, were you aware of all the paranormal history of Utah?
Yeah. So just a little bit of my background and how I got started in this. I grew up in a home that was built in 1883. So it was really old, an old farmhouse. And by the time I was 8 years old, I had figured out, hey, my house is not like other people's houses. There are things going on in here that don't make sense. Everything from full body apparitions to footsteps on the stairs, people speaking and whispering in corners. And so, because of that, and because of the fact that when I was little, going into my teenage years, my parents didn't like us talking about that we were in a haunted house. We lived in a haunted house. So I kind of had to take that energy and just do research, read everything I possibly could about the paranormal, and just, search it out. And because I felt akin to it, whether it was ghosts or UFOs or Bigfoot, I just read everything I could get my hands on in those first younger years. And I still do that to today. I'm constantly studying it. And so, that's what really got me started. And then later on, I was able to share my stories because I had friends that would come to my house and have experiences. And then I had to admit, I grew up in a haunted house, and they would want me to tell stories that had happened to me at parties and stuff, which I did. And then slowly people started bringing me stories or telling me, I heard about this story. And then I would have to go hunt down, the person that it actually happened to. And so, for the longest time, it was a very slow process. But once my first book came out, and I have my, my website, I've got my email in every one of my books. It's much easier. People come to me and it's made it a lot easier to get the stories, but it's still just as fascinating to me now as it was when I started. So.
As someone who wrote a book using the method you're describing, sort of person to person, knocking on doors and making phone calls, I know how time consuming it can be. So I have a huge amount of admiration for what you accomplished.
Oh, well, thank you.
So I'm curious, what was it that brought you back to Utah for the next volume of the book?
Yeah. So my book right before this one it's called Stranger World. And I did that because I had collected stories from all over the world. I have stories from England and Germany, Australia, Brazil. And, my wife and my wife is my editor and she helps me a lot with all of this. And we were just kind of thinking, where do we go now? We've gone bigger and bigger and bigger. Where are we going to go now? And my wife mentioned, she goes, well, you're getting quite a few stories still from home and from around Utah. Maybe you should start doing state to state and see if you can do it that way. And so because I had quite a few stories from Utah, I started there. And then I was also able to reach out to people and say, hey, my next book's going to be Stranger Utah. If you guys know anybody who has a story here in Utah, let me know. And that worked out really well because some of my favorite stories in the book came from friends who had a relative or somebody that they knew that had a really cool story and were able to get me connected to them. And so it just kind of grew very organically. But what's amazing is, to me, for example, when I said, okay, I'm going to do Utah, it was almost like I turned a switch on in the universe because, really people started bringing me stories from Utah, which I love when something like that happens. So, and it just kind of flew like that.
Out of curiosity, you mentioned some of your favorite stories. Can you give us one of the stories? So you don't have to break the entire thing down, but I'm curious to know what one of your favorites from Stranger Utah is.
So one of the ones that's my favorite is I had a friend contacted me and he goes, my wife's uncle has an amazing story. I'm going to reach out to him and see if he'd be willing to tell you. And it went a couple weeks, and then I got an email from him and his son, and it ended up being the one. If you've read the book, it's the one where he was an archaeologist that had things happen to him at an Anasazi dig site in the 70s in southern Utah. They got chased off of the site with giant orbs, and then later on by a giant wolf at night, and to the point where the head archaeologist at the time had to say, okay, we're not there until the sun's been up for an hour, and we all leave an hour before the sun goes down. And that's how they ended up having to be able to do that dig site. And what was amazing to me and why I really like that is because it's very paranormal, it's very detailed, but it comes from somebody who has a scientific background. And anytime I can talk to somebody who has a scientific background that has a paranormal story, I just love that.
Absolutely. Well, I know as someone who's been briefly to the Anasazi cave dwellings, there's certainly, I never experienced anything unusual there, but they have a very, very powerful feeling to them. It doesn't surprise me that someone would have an experience there.
Yeah. And what's kind of, really weird about that entire thing is they've been studying it for a long time and they still are not sure what happened to them. The collapse and the disappearance of the Anasazi, and really, they were at war with a lot of the other tribes at the time and just kind of disappeared. So on top of, the spiritual side of it, there's this lingering enigma of what happened to them, which is also fascinating.
It is indeed. I mean, I remember the day I was there, I think we were there maybe half an hour, and the most incredible storm moved in, and we had to go immediately. And I think it was May. And when we got on the highway, man, it snowed and snowed and snowed. It was a hell of a thing. I think we were going to New Mexico that night. We ended up having to pull over not far out of the cave dwellings and just wait. You couldn't safely drive. It was a hell of a thing.
Yeah, the weather in Utah can be like that. I've seen it snow on the 4th of July, and I've seen it be 102 on the 4th of July. So you just don't know in Utah.
Oh, man.
So,
and we think we've got it bad, John.
You're right. It's wild. I mean, because honestly, especially where I live in northern Utah, there's such a swing because Oftentimes in January, we have, minus 40 degree weather. And then in August, it's 100 and something. So we just have like this. It's just insane. 6 months is it's like another landscape altogether here in Utah. So
I thought it was interesting that one of your favorite stories includes an orb, because I really noticed that was kind of like a perhaps unintentional or intentional, I don't know, through line through the book. There was a number of really significant orb stories.
I love talking about the orb stories too, because especially in my books, when I'm telling the story, I like to emphasize the difference between what I consider a true orb and then, say, dust floating past a lens, because a lot of times you see paranormal shows and everything, and it's IR light bouncing off of something floating. But the people that I interview who have honest to goodness orb stories, they have an internal light that they see, and they're oftentimes big. Right here, not too far from me, is a place that's called Logan Canyon, and it's very paranormally active. And one thing that I've witnessed over the years, I've even written about, is the number of extremely large orbs that people see in that canyon. And it makes me wonder, is it paranormal? Is it maybe a geographic thing where there something, because there's a lot of fault lines involved? But yeah, there is quite a few stories like that in Utah.
Was it the hiking story that ended with the people involved felt physically ill for days afterwards with flu-like symptoms?
Yeah, and that doesn't happen all the time, but on occasion it can. It can really affect them physically for days. The other thing that's kind of fascinating along those lines as well is that on occasion somebody who, especially if they get in close contact with an orb, will end up sick. And it's very similar to the people that I've interviewed who have been in contact with the black-eyed kids. Some of them will actually end up being very, very ill for a few days afterwards as well. And so I wonder, I don't know if there's a connection there, but I think it's kind of fascinating that the same as, people who will have a contact with an orb and it's a very close contact will end up with very similar, sickness and extremely tired and everything for a couple of days. Like the one that you're talking about near St. George, the gentleman who was hiking and came in contact with an orb that followed him out of the canyon and just kind of scared the crap out of him. And then, he was really ill for a couple of days and he wasn't sure if it was connected, but I kind of said, it's not unusual for that to happen.
A little while ago, Paul sent me a link to a collection of John Keel's newsletters. And you and I were talking about this, Paul, about how some people, after seeing UFOs, they had these sort of symptoms of almost like sun exposure, and where there was kind of not just burns on the skin, but a kind of nausea and a general unwellness afterwards. This sounds very similar.
There has been several incidents of people that I've read who've had close contact with UFOs, and they seem to get some type of radiation poisoning is what it sounds like. And it's very similar to these other things. So, you wonder if it has something to do with the propulsion, or it's really kind of a fascinating part of the whole story through it.
Paul, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm quite interested, like John says, about what goes on at Logan Canyon, because for me, it's one of those places like Hessendal in Norway, where you've got regularly reported strange lights being seen. Obviously, as John refers to earlier, these seem a bit more inquisitive in comparison. It's almost like an amalgamation of different phenomenon, because there are several places in the US, like Brown Mountain or the Marfa Lights, where people claim to see these strange lights. I was seeing somebody who's a well-known experiencer assistant, NK Kanda. She was on about she'd seen the Marfa Lights the other day. I spoken firsthand to somebody who was chased by the Min Min lights in Australia, which is one of the few things I've ever heard, which is similar to, like John was saying, about people being followed out of the canyon by these lights. And so I think when we look at other light-based phenomenon around the US and beyond, the canyon in Utah seems to be quite different in the fact that it almost seems as if they're intelligent, whereas the others seem to be, perhaps, as John referred to there, sometimes they're near fault lines, sometimes it's quite seismic activity, Sometimes they're around old volcanic calderas that have become extinct. So it's interesting that these phenomena are very similar, but when you drill down into them, they are very different, despite the fact that they are of a similar shaped object that people are experiencing.
I mean, John, based on your research and sort of your personal experience over the years, would you ascribe an intelligence to these kinds of orbs?
Well, some of them I would definitely. One of the stories that I've written about, and I don't remember which book it is in, but there was a gentleman I interviewed at the time. He was a student at USU, and he loved to fish, and he'd woken up and it was a little bit raining, and so he decided to go up on Logan River and fish. And as he's wading through the river fishing, off through the trees, he notices, a light, and he's watching the light, and as it comes out into a clearing, he sees that it is a kind of a giant orb, almost the size of a basketball. But what was really interesting is that when he saw it, clearly, it stopped and almost seemed to, he's like, I can't explain it, but it almost seemed to know that I was watching it, because then it started floating towards him through the trees and towards him. So, and there was another experience too of two gentlemen who were up, students that were taking picture of the Newswander comet when it was coming through. They'd gone up the canyon to get out of the city lights, and they watched one that was going through, floating through the mountain. They thought at first was a torch or flashlight, something, but then as it got closer, they saw it was an orb. And when they witnessed it, it almost seemed to know that it was being watched. So there seems to be some sort of intelligence when it comes to these experiences, at least in Logan Canyon, because they do seem to, in some instances, understand that somebody's watching them and adjust or disappear at that point. So,
do you get the opposite being reported, John? Whereas rather than them following people follow them because, as you referred to earlier, they might mistake it for a torch or a lantern or something. And so you would get the very similar kind of reports that other areas where they're known as will-o'-the-wisps, or people claim that it almost seems to entice them into areas where they're not comfortable or they may not know the terrain, and all of a sudden they're lost.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever interviewed somebody who's kind of been led off by a light. I have interviewed a ton of people who've been led into the forest by something calling out as a woman in trouble or a child in trouble, or a big thing is mimicking a relative of theirs. But I've actually never had anybody follow a light before. There is one spot in up the canyon here, Blacksmith Fork, where there is a phantom light that happens on the hillside, but it seems like it's one of those things where it's far enough away that it looks like a lantern, but when people try and get closer, they're not able to see it, and it feels much more like one of those things that will happen over and over again, whether somebody's there or not. Maybe no interaction whatsoever, but yeah. That's very interesting idea that somebody might follow the lights. So
you mentioned people in the wilderness hearing things that kind of draw them out, and sometimes they sound like crying babies, sometimes they sound like people in a place that they shouldn't be. And you start the book with a really unnerving mimic story, and you say at the end that sort of like, it seems maybe like it was a prank by the house, but it seemed quite sinister to me.
Yeah, it was very, really kind of out there, that story. And, there's, in my experience, there's a very thin line between when something might seem like it's playing a prank and then also seems very sinister as well. Because of my background, I usually, in particular, like the house that I grew up in, there's at least one spirit that is a huge prankster. I mean, just loves to play pranks on people. And I never felt like it was sinister in any way, but I can definitely see where somebody in that situation would feel that way. So, and in that story that you're talking about in particular, yeah, I could definitely see how that would definitely come across as maybe seeming very sinister. So.
It took on a number of different voices in a fairly short amount of time, did it not?
Yeah, it did. Yep. All different kinds of voices that were going on and sometimes even mocking. And so it's one of those stories that is very disturbing, at least to me, because there is an intelligence behind it. You know what I mean? There's this intelligence behind it that is using, its abilities to completely make the individual feel so unnerved. So yeah, it can be very frightening.
Paul, I think I've told you this story before, but I have such a hang up about the whole mimic thing that years ago, my wife woke up in the night. I always go to bed much later than she does. And she called to me from the bedroom because as it turned out, she was going to ask me to bring her some ibuprofen for a headache she had. But when she called me, I got to the bedroom door, and because of where the light in the hallway was situated and with the light in the bedroom being off, you could not see at all into the bedroom. It was just darkness. And again, it was nothing paranormal about it. But hearing my wife's voice called from this dark room, it just immediately, all these old nightmares come back. And I said, yeah, close your eyes, sweetie, just for a sec. And she closes her eyes, turn on the light. Okay, yeah, it's just her. We're good. All right, I'll be right back. It's ludicrous, but I had to do it.
And like I said, when I was growing up, one of the biggest things that happened a lot in that house was, especially when I was a kid, having my mother call me to the kitchen, and my mother was not in the kitchen, and I would have to go find her, and she would be like, "No, I didn't call you," but it's very clearly my mother's voice. In fact, that would happen quite a bit, and in fact, what's very interesting and kind of weird is. A couple of years ago, oh boy, it'd be hard to say because my oldest boy, it involved my oldest boy. But anyway, I was coaching his football team, and afterwards we were going back, but we had to stop by Grandma and Grandpa's house because they were on vacation and I had to feed the cats. And so my son and his friends went into the front room, and I said, I'm going to run to the store and we're out of cat food. I'm going to run and get cat food. I'll be right back. And I went and got the cat food, came back. All 4 boys are sitting on the front lawn. And I'm like, what in the heck? And when I pulled up, the 3 boys ran right into the truck. And come to find out, I had left them. They went in and went into the front room and turned on the TV. And they're watching the TV. And all of a sudden, my mom's voice, so my son's grandma's voice, comes from the kitchen saying, Cody. And Cody stopped, and everybody looked at Cody, and then she said it again, and it was closer now from the kitchen. It was closer into just the next room, and they're like, your grandma's calling you. And Cody goes, my grandma is in Las Vegas. And they all just bolted out of the house as quick as they could. And so that's why they were on the front porch or on the front lawn sitting waiting for me to come. And every one of those boys were like, I'm never going in that house again, ever.
Oh man,
it's a good way to keep children under control, John. If you just want to hide in a cupboard.
Yeah, those boys are in their 20s now, and they still talk to me about it when I see them. They're still like, "Oh, I still remember when the ghost got us." So it's pretty funny.
Way back, maybe about 4.5 years ago, we did an episode about haunting in the Philippines. And one of our listeners, Bob, he sent in a story about his family's old house there back when they lived in the Philippines. And he said in their house they had so many similar things happen that they actually had a buddy system for going to the bathroom because so often things would try and imitate the family members. And I thought, frankly, I would just leave.
Yeah. Yep. That's, and I have heard so many stories about the Philippines. And I just don't have a very many first person ones. I would love to get them because for some reason, Filipino ghosts are very sinister. I've just got that feeling from a lot of the people and a lot of their stories and folklore that, their ghosts are really scary.
Well, we'll have to make sure to include your contact details at the end. I know we have a fairly reasonable size audience in the Philippines, so maybe we can hook you up with some people.
Yes, definitely. I would love to hear from you if you're in the Philippines.
So, John, there's another story I was really curious about. It's probably the topic in the paranormal that really bothers me the most. Like, mimics are creepy, but there is something about the loss of agency involved in missing time that I find deeply upsetting.
Yes. And this gentleman that contacted me about that, he is still, he's still just shooken up by it. Just to give a brief kind of summary, it started, one of the incidents, he was in college and, he was in class and he had to run to the restroom and he went to the bathroom, and somewhere between where he walked in and walked out, he lost 2 hours. Just like the class was just starting and he walked into the bathroom, felt a little lightheaded, but when he came out, the hall is just full of people. Everybody's moving, everything's going. And he's lost like 2 hours of time. That was one of the times that it happened to him where it just makes no sense. He never passed out. He never fell on the floor, didn't have a medical incident, but just for some reason walking through that door. And then later on, the same thing happened to him again at the movie theater. Him and his wife later on in life, they're going to the movie, and he's like, I'm going to run to the bathroom before the movie starts. Goes out, goes into the bathroom, has that little tiny bit of a dizzy spell, comes out, runs into his wife, and she's like, where have you been? The movie's almost over, And he's like, what are you talking about? I just left. And, if I remember correctly, and I apologize, she'd even had somebody go into the bathroom to try and find him, and he wasn't there in that time frame. So it wasn't like he had a medical episode and fallen down. He was just, for like an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes, he was just gone. And it brings up some really weird questions of, is it an abduction kind of a thing? Is it just a ripple in time thing? What in the heck is going on? And how is it tied to him? Because I've heard similar things, but it's kind of a one-off thing, but this has happened to him, multiple times, and he can be very disconcerting. He was very upset about it, and very normal, everyday guy with a, college degree, normal, home, job, everything. But he just has had 2 incidents, and at the time, where he completely disappeared for almost 2 hours. And it's one of those that, I classify under, a glitch in the matrix kind of thing, because it doesn't seem to fall into any other category. So
they are strange cases, missing time, like you say, John, because often the vast majority of them are attached to UFO sightings, or you have an experiencer that has constantly grown up and has strange dreams about seeing people in their rooms or wherever. Whereas this is just so, pardon the pun, so completely alien to the cliches that surround missing time that it makes it stand out even more, because we don't usually get that kind of social situation where people seem to just lose themselves in a pretty normal circumstance.
Yeah, exactly. It's in a very public place, a movie theater and a campus. You can't get any more public than that. And yet he still had this problem because, I've talked to other people who've had, missing time, but it has to do with them being lost, in the woods, or like you say, involving UFOs or something like this. But this is just very, very public and very... what I find really disconcerting is because you think in the back of your head, if I avoid the wilderness, if I avoid being alone, if I avoid all of these things, maybe I can avoid it. But this happened in an absolutely most public place, and there's no way you can avoid something like that.
I was watching something the other week. A friend of mine over here, Philip Mantle, who's one of our premier ufologists here, John. He's just done a TV show for a couple of episodes, and one of them was one of the strangest incidents I've ever heard of, because I'm not sure I've ever come across a case like this, and I'm just wondering, pick your brains with some of the stories that you've come across throughout your writing career, John. That we had a situation where 2 separate cars with people in 15 miles either side of this epicenter saw the same thing at the same time, essentially where one event was finishing for one car with a man and a woman in it, another car with two women in it was seeing the same thing from the opposite side. The first car, they saw it just after 10 o'clock, and then they suddenly came round and they were 200 yards up the road, and it was 10 to 11. The other people saw the lights starting at 10 to 11 o'clock, thought, this is really strange, what's going on? And then the next thing, they looked at their dashboard on their car, and it was flashing 00. And it was only by seeing that they thought, hang on, what's going on here? And when they looked at their watch, it was 10 past 1. So the first group of people had lost 45 minutes, and the second group of people had lost just over 2 hours, almost as if one finished and the other one started. And I've never heard of that kind of situation, John, where you have two groups of people who have differing levels of missing time that essentially seem to bookend each other.
Yeah. And, the more I think about it, and especially when it comes to like incidents like that, I wonder, a lot of times when we think about UFOs and missing time, we think of, they were abducted, their minds were wiped, and then they were put back in the car and they don't remember, which that definitely does happen. The other thing that I think of as well that could possibly have something to do with it is the fact that because they're able to travel faster than light, the UFOs, they have special whatever, does it cause some sort of time wave or, some sort of spatial wave when they're traveling that affects things around them? And if you're close enough to it and, they're now traveling faster than the speed of light using whatever their drive is, does it cause some sort of weird effect that way where time gets all messed up? Because we know that time is an actual thing and it can be affected by gravity. And so I often wonder, and I'm way out of my, this is way out of left field because I am not that kind of scientist whatsoever. But I just wonder if there isn't some sort of wave that comes off of that as an after effect for the fact that they do travel faster than light and use what is essentially, gravity waves is what they talk about them using. So I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. Strangely, I was watching something about light speed. They were talking about getting to Venus and Jupiter, and they were talking about this whole light speed paradox. That essentially, as soon as you leave Earth, everybody behind you is going to pass away because you're traveling at such a speed that everything behind you is going faster and faster and faster. Whereas for you, it's a matter of weeks, months even. But on Earth, decades will have passed. And I think you kind of touch on something quite interesting there, John, that maybe this is some kind of after effect. Because for a lot of it, we simply are grasping at straws when we talk about these things, because obviously we can't build anything that can travel faster than light at the minute. We can work out what the speed of light is and how far things can travel and what that distance could be, because I think it's like something like 1.43 trillion miles a second or something crazy. I think they mentioned yesterday. And so does that even in such a short burst of time, does that cause this missing time because they think they're watching something for 5 minutes, but in essence, we're working on their time, not our time, and therefore that's why this gap appears.
Yeah, definitely could be something along those lines, something that you may not even think of as, like, for example, if you are on the tarmac and an aircraft breaks the sound barrier, that's an honest to goodness wave that can affect your body. It can really, affect your ears, everything. And maybe it's this very similar kind of when you're messing with time and gravity, it can create maybe a wave like that that's going to affect your time. And because you're close enough, it's not enough to, spin you off into whatever, but it's enough to mess up your time for that short period that you're right there. So who knows?
It's a compelling theory. I know it, again, missing time is one of the things that really, really disturbs me because you just seem to have no control whatsoever. And there's no way to know when it's going to happen, and there's no way to know how long it'll be before you come back, or whether you'll come back at all.
Yeah. I have a story. I'll tell you quick. It's in one of my other books, but it has to do with missing time, but it doesn't have to do with a person missing time. I interviewed this woman. She lived in a very poor part of Idaho. Back in the 80s, she was growing up, and she wanted a dog like really bad, but her parents were really poor. But on her I think it was 10th birthday, they got her this little mutt dog. And, she loved this dog, and it had a really cool patch on the side that kind of looked like a heart. It was black and white, and it had this. And she saved up her money and bought this really cool collar with its name on it. And she was so excited. And her family go on a trip into the mountains they always gathered firewood near the end of summer because they supplemented warming their house with a wood stove. And in and amongst all of everybody doing their work, the dog disappears, and they look all over for this dog and can't find it. And she's just heartbroken. And so they go home, and, she's felt horrible. But 5 years later, she's now 15. Her dad tells her, we're going up to get wood. You've got to come with us. She has been able to get out of it because she's like, oh, it reminds me of my dog. And they're like, no, we got to go get this wood. And so her and her brother and her dad are up there collecting wood. And while she's waiting for her turn was to knock the branches off with an axe after they fell the tree. She sees something running up the road, and it's a dog. And it runs up to her, and it's her dog. But it can't be her dog. It has the same patch. She turns over the collar. It's got the brand new collar and the tag that says, and she's like, scoops it up, and she goes to her dad. She's like, Dad, my dog came back. And he's like, that can't be your dog. That was 5 years ago. And she's like, no, he came back. And so they take the dog home, and her mom and dad are like, you know what? Let's take it to the vet. Let's see what's going on. Don't say anything to the vet about your crazy dog. And they take it to the vet, and the vet's like, oh yeah, you've got a really healthy dog here, about 7 months old, 8 months old, and really healthy. She seems really good. And somehow that dog disappeared 5 years ago and then reappeared 5 years later. She says, I know I'm not crazy. She says, my parents still won't talk about it. She says, it was the same dog. It had the same patch on the side that looked like a heart. The collar I bought that thing, it knew the tricks I had taught it as a kid. She says, I know that is the craziest thing you've ever heard in your life, but it was the same dog. And it happened to be the same area too, where they had been cutting wood 5 years ago. And I just think that is one of the most weird and amazing stories that I've ever heard. But she was very sincere. I took her at her word. I did publish that story because even though it's weird and crazy, but it's that somehow that dog disappeared for 5 years and reappeared the same age. Who knows? It's weird.
I mean, I really like stories like that, John, because if you ignore the disappearing bit, everything about that story is quite normal. It's the same dog. It's got the same pattern of its coat. It's got the same collar on. Knows her, knows the area, shows that it knows her and it remembers everything. So as far as that dog's concerned, nothing's happened. It's only when you say it disappeared 5 years ago and it's reappeared and it hasn't aged, does that take it to a whole new level? Because then it's not like a normal missing time story or where somebody disappears and reappears, or some of the other incredible stories where we hear people have moved house and gone 2,000 miles away, and then 6 months later their pet that disappeared turns up on their doorstep, which I find is some of the most incredible stories you can ever come across. Despite people saying, oh, well, it can't be the same animal. Well, it clearly is. There aren't gangs of golden Labradors wandering around America looking for somewhere to live, as far as I'm aware. There's lots of other things like that, John, but that domestic pets are usually pretty special. You've got that bond and you know it. And so for this dog to disappear and return as the same age and to be confirmed by a vet? Because we all know that puppies don't, eventually they're all a bit awkward because they're growing into their limbs and their ears and things. And so for the vet to then say, yeah, you've got a lovely healthy puppy here, 7-8 months old, that for me just makes me even, that's more mysterious than a standard disappearing person or missing time case, because that just thinks, well, where's it been for 5 years? It's frozen in time. It's not disappeared. It's been frozen. Yeah.
Yeah, it is really strange. And that's up there with one of the stranger stories I've ever gotten and able to, interview somebody about. It's just weird. But because of that, I just love it. And I love that I actually got that story,
Oh, it's a fantastic story. I mean, I don't know how much either of you watch Futurama, but I'm getting Major Fry's dog vibes.
Oh, I've only ever watched that once because I bawled my eyes out at the end of that episode. The Jurassic Bark is what it's called.
Yeah. How could you watch it more than once? You'd have to be made of stone yourself.
You would. Yes. Oh, yep.
Oh, man. Well, John, we've really had a great time talking to you, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface. We could keep you on here for, I think, probably about double the length, but we will let you get back to your life. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, man.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. It's always a blast, and love the show. And so, anytime you guys want me back, I'm happy to come back.
That will definitely be happening. Where can everyone find you online?
So my website is strangerbridgerland.com. You can get on there and find me and how to contact me. And then all of my books are available on Amazon on either Kindle, softback, and they're all on Audible now. So if you're a listening kind of person, you can also listen to them.
And they're a great deal, folks. You're not going to find a better deal for quality ghost stories and just stories of the paranormal generally than Stranger Bridgerland.
Thank you guys so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you, John. Welcome back. Thanks again to John Olsen for hanging out with us. You can pick up all the Stranger Bridgerland books on Amazon. They are available now in Audible as well. And they're really quick little reads. I think Stranger Utah is about 120 pages, something like that. But again, some really, really great stories. Well, Paul, my friend, we are about to do our live show for patrons at the $10 level. So I will ask you, where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all social media platforms and podcast sites.
Fantastic. I'm Largely the Truth on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter. Nope, Letterboxd. And you can find my other show, Weird Together, everywhere fine podcasts live. All right, so as always, we'd like to end Talk Spooky by featuring a tune from an independent musical artist. This time around, we're going to be sharing a selection from the band King Tut's Tomb. King Tut's Tomb is a project of Frank Rauch and Ken Clemaire. Guys, if I'm getting your names wrong, I apologize. I first heard their work in 2017, back when I had my weekly music show on Stoke FM. I played the title track from their album Nightmare a number of times. I really, really love that song. Then, when I was down in Indiana a couple weeks ago for the Gobbler Market, I got to meet Frank. Frank is, of course, partner to the artist Brett Manning. The Gobbler Market was held on their lovely property in rural Indiana. And not only did I get to meet Frank finally, I got to hear him play, and he very kindly gifted me a couple albums by King Tut's Tomb. So I thought on this episode I would share a track from their latest album. It was released in October 2020. The album is called Time to Go. It features cover art from friend of the show Sam Sheeran, who is, of course, an extraordinarily talented dude. And the track I will be sharing on this episode is called Bar. Again, the track is Bar from King Tut's Tomb from their 2020 album, Time to Go. If you want to hear more from King Tut's Tomb, and I recommend you do, head to kingtutstomb.bandcamp.com or follow the link in the show notes in your podcatcher or at ghoststoryguys.com. Thanks so much for joining us, folks. We will be back next week with episode 194, and until then, we will leave you with King Tut's Tomb and Bar.
Let's go down to the bar, yeah, it's not too far. Drinking beer, singing songs, smoking in the car. Call my friend and he comes in here rock star. In the back room, laughing and coughing hard. Let's go down to the bar and we'll bring the boys. And we'll let us all in just to hear the noise. See them up there messing around with their toys. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Let's go down to the bar and I hear the voice. There's a friend in the car with a drug of choice. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Let's go down to the bar, yeah, it's not too far. Drink some beer, shoot some pool, maybe play some darts. Call my friends and they come and they're all rock stars. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, baby, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Well, it's the bar I love, and you're the one I'm thinking of. Let's go down to the bar, yeah, it's not too far. Drinking beer, singing songs, smoking